I'll never forget the way my uncle laughed that night, like he had just delivered the punchline of the century. "Still delivering pizzas?" he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, his voice dripping with mock pity. Then he added, "Well, I guess someone's got to do it." A few people chuckled along with him, unsure if they were supposed to. I just smiled, keeping my hands in my pockets, playing it cool like I always do. But inside, something sharp twisted in my chest. Not embarrassment, not shame, just that deep, familiar sting of being underestimated again. My name's Dylan. I'm 27. And yeah, for a while, I did deliver pizzas. But that's not really the whole story. Not even close. Let me rewind a bit, because the truth doesn't hit as hard unless you know the full picture. I grew up in a pretty loud, opinionated family. You know the type. Everyone's got an opinion on what you should be doing, how you should be living, and they'll offer it whether you ask or not, especially during family events. We're not talking warm and fuzzy gatherings with board games and pie. I'm talking sharp elbows, bragging rights, and subtle power plays disguised as concern. It's always been like that. My dad, before he passed, used to call it competitive kindness. Like, "Oh, we love you, but just so you know, we're doing better than you." After he died, things shifted. My mom, bless her, tried to keep the peace, but without Dad's calming presence, I started to feel like an outsider, especially around Uncle Rick. He's my dad's younger brother and the kind of guy who peaked in his early 30s and never stopped talking about it. He ran a small chain of auto shops and acted like he was Jeff Bezos. His kids, my cousins, went to state schools, but you'd think they were Ivy League from the way he bragged. Family barbecues were basically his personal TED Talks. Then there's my cousin Andrew, Uncle Rick's golden boy. Tall, smug, perfectly gelled hair. He's 29 and works at a mid-tier insurance firm, but you'd think he was some Wall Street wolf. We were close as kids, until he figured out he could get ahead by stepping on people instead of helping them. He's the kind of guy who'd fake a smile while pocketing your wallet. So when Andrew announced he was getting engaged and there'd be an engagement party at Uncle Rick's house, I almost didn't go. But Mom begged me, said it would mean a lot to her, said she didn't want people to think I was off doing who knows what. I knew what she meant. She didn't want them speculating. Because that's the thing, I had been kind of quiet the last couple years. Low profile, barely posting online, skipping events. And yeah, I let them believe whatever they wanted. That I was still delivering pizzas. That I hadn't found my way yet. That I was coasting through life. I parked my car a few houses down that night, just to avoid the long line of luxury SUVs lined up in Uncle Rick's driveway. Walked in wearing a clean, simple button-up and jeans. Nothing fancy, just enough to pass. The place was packed. String lights in the backyard, expensive catered finger foods, jazz playing from a Bluetooth speaker. It reeked of forced elegance. And of course, Uncle Rick was holding court near the grill, beer in hand, barking jokes like a third-rate stand-up comic. He spotted me before I even made it to the patio. "Dylan," he called out, loud and theatrical. "Hey, look who showed up. Everyone, make way for the pizza prince." A few heads turned. Some polite laughter. My jaw tensed, but I smiled. "Good to see you too, Uncle Rick," I said, giving him a handshake. He grinned, leaned in, and added under his breath, "Hope you brought coupons." Then he let out another loud laugh, as if we were both in on the joke. But we weren't. Not even close. The thing is, I could have ended it right there. I could have said something. Shut it down. But I didn't. I've learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't loud. It's quiet. It's patient. And it waits for the right moment. So I smiled. That calm, practiced smile that hides everything underneath. I mingled. Said hi to a few relatives. Gave Mom a kiss on the cheek and told her I was fine. Truth was, I was simmering. Not because of the insult. Honestly, I'd heard worse, but because it reminded me just how little they ever really knew me. And that's when it happened. About 20 minutes later, Andrew came out of the house, hand in hand with his fiancée. She was pretty, poised, a little stiff like she'd memorized everything she was supposed to say before walking in. Her name was Tessa. She wore a champagne-colored dress and the kind of jewelry you buy just to say you bought it. She smiled at the crowd as people clapped and cheered. But then her eyes met mine, and everything changed. It was like time hiccuped. Her expression dropped, not in a dramatic movie way, but just enough to notice. Her smile twitched. Her grip on Andrew's arm subtly loosened. Her pupils darted back to me again, narrowing slightly. And then she pulled out her phone. She tapped something in, then stared at the screen. Her face went pale. She nudged Andrew, showed him the screen. He blinked, then frowned. Looked at me, back at the phone, then at me again. The music kept playing. People kept talking. But something in the air shifted, like a storm cloud that no one could quite see yet. I took a sip of my drink and leaned against the patio railing, watching, waiting, because I knew exactly what she had Googled, and I knew exactly what was coming next. You could feel the tension ripple across the backyard like a silent wave, even though no one was saying anything yet. Not directly, but the glances started, little shifts in posture. The way Andrew kept looking at me with narrowed eyes, like he was trying to fit me into a puzzle that suddenly didn't make sense. I didn't move, just watched, waited. Tessa whispered something to him, then excused herself and disappeared back inside the house. Andrew looked stunned for a beat, then followed, not even trying to hide it. A few people noticed, Uncle Rick included, and tilted their heads in confusion. He muttered something to one of his buddies and they laughed again, probably making another joke at my expense. But the vibe was changing. Still, I didn't say a word. Just let it all simmer. You'd think something like that, someone going pale, whispering, walking off like they'd seen a ghost, might trigger curiosity. Concern, even. But not in this family. Not with them. No one asked me how I was doing, what I'd been up to, if I was okay. Instead, they just resumed their programmed small talk. Like I was a background character in someone else's highlight reel. I wandered inside a few minutes later to grab a drink. That's when I saw them, Andrew and Tessa, huddled in the hallway by the guest bathroom. Her phone was lit up, and Andrew's face had turned the same shade of disbelief she'd worn earlier. His voice was low, but I caught the end of a sentence as I walked past. That can't be him. He was delivering. He delivers pizzas, for God's sake. Tessa just shook her head. It's him, she said. It's definitely him. I kept walking like I hadn't heard a thing, my heart thudding hard, but my expression calm. Cool. Collected. The kitchen was empty, thankfully. I grabbed a soda from the fridge and took a few slow sips, breathing in deep, grounding myself. Because I knew what was coming. It wasn't going to be dramatic at first. No one was going to scream or throw drinks. That wasn't how this family operated. No, this was going to be slow, controlled, manipulative. Death by 1,000 smiles. I didn't have to wait long. By the time I made it back outside, things were different. Not loudly, just subtly wrong. People I'd known my whole life were suddenly giving me these curious, slightly forced smiles. The kind of smiles you give when you're pretending not to know something shocking. Uncle Rick was watching me more now, and so was Andrew's mom, Aunt Liz. She had that fake concerned look she always wore when she wanted to fish for gossip without looking like she was fishing. I leaned against a post near the string lights, watching it all unfold. I was done mingling, done playing along. And then Andrew approached. He didn't look smug anymore. He looked confused and a little angry, like I tricked him somehow, like I owed him an explanation. Hey, he said, voice tight. I raised an eyebrow. Hey. He glanced around, lowered his voice. So, you want to maybe explain what this is? He held up his phone. On the screen was a Forbes article. Not a big one, just one of those side features they sometimes run on rising entrepreneurs. But yeah, my face was there. My name. My company. And that was just the mild version of the story. I shrugged. You Googled me. Guess you found out. He looked irritated. So, what? You've just been sitting on this. Letting everyone think you're still some broke delivery guy? Letting. I repeated. I didn't exactly correct anyone, but I never said I was broke. He laughed under his breath, but it wasn't amused. You're unbelievable. I get that a lot, I said, and took another sip of soda. You know what this looks like, right? He snapped. Like you were trying to make us look stupid. You didn't need my help with that. His jaw tightened. Tessa's freaked out. She said you were at some tech conference last year with Elon Musk. What? I tilted my head, pretending to think. Oh yeah, that was fun. The guy's weird in person. You're messing with me, he growled. No, Andrew. I'm really not. That's when Uncle Rick joined the party. Everything all right here? He asked, stepping between us like a referee. Except he didn't look concerned. He looked curious. Calculating. Like he just caught the scent of something juicy and expensive. Everything's fine, I said before Andrew could answer. Uncle Rick gave me a long look. Heard there's some kind of mix-up going on, he said with a smirk. Didn't realize you were the big tech guy now, Dylan. I shrugged. I don't usually bring it up. Doesn't really go with the whole pizza delivery image. He laughed, But this time it wasn't mocking. It was probing. You really been pulling a fast one on us all this time, huh? Nope, I said calmly. You just never asked. That night should have ended there, but of course, it didn't. The story had only started unraveling. Because once Tessa and Andrew told their version of what they'd found online, the rest of the family started digging too. One cousin found an old Bloomberg interview. Another found my name listed as the founder of a startup that had recently hit a 9-figure valuation. And when they saw photos of me at summits, in suits, shaking hands with people they'd only seen on TV, the atmosphere shifted. Suddenly, I wasn't the failure. I was the unknown variable. They didn't know what to do with me anymore. And that's when the masks really came off. The next morning, I got a text from my mom. She said Uncle Rick had called her. Said he wanted to catch up properly. Wanted to talk business with me. I laughed. Didn't respond. But the call started. Aunt Liz. My cousin Brandon. Even Andrew, who left a weirdly cordial voicemail asking if I wanted to grab lunch sometime. I said no to all of them. I thought that would be the end of it. But of course, they couldn't let it go. A few weeks later, I got a wedding invite in the mail. Andrew and Tessa. Formal dress. No +1. That was weird, but whatever. I wasn't planning on going. I set it aside. 2 days later, I got a follow-up note from Aunt Liz, handwritten and filled with faux sweetness. We'd love to have you attend, Dylan. Maybe you can finally share some of your projects with the family. Everyone's so proud of you. I crumpled it and tossed it. Then my mom called again. Her voice was low, like she didn't want to be overheard. Dylan, she said, did you know what they're planning? No, and I don't want to. She hesitated. They've been telling people that you're funding the wedding. I froze. What? They're telling everyone that you offered. That it was your way of showing gratitude to the family. That you want to reconnect. My blood ran cold. I hadn't spoken to Andrew since that night. I hadn't made a single offer. I hadn't even RSVP'd. But they were using me, my name, my money, to boost their status. That wasn't just entitled. That was a betrayal. My pulse pounded in my ears as Mom continued. And they've been hinting that you're going to speak at the reception. That you're going to give some big speech about family and success and second chances. I hung up. That night, I stared at the ceiling for hours, turning everything over in my head. The lies, the manipulation, the fake kindness, the years of dismissal followed by sudden desperation. They hadn't changed. They'd just recalculated. And they thought I'd play along. They thought they could weaponize my success. The same success they used to laugh at when I was broke, tired, and delivering pizzas in the rain. They thought they could control me again. That's when I made a decision. Not out of spite, not out of pride, but because some people only learn the hard way. I started making some calls. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was angry, though I was, but because something deeper had shifted in me. That moment when my mom told me they were using my name to fund their image, it broke something. Not in a dramatic, fall-on-the-floor kind of way. More like a quiet shattering. A realization that I'd been trying to outrun for years. I'd never really been part of this family. At least not in the way they claimed. I think deep down, I always knew. I just kept hoping things would get better with time. That if I worked hard enough, if I succeeded big enough, they'd finally see me. Not as the underachieving kid whose dad died too young. Not as the pizza guy. Not as the cautionary tale. Just as Dylan. As myself. But that moment, hearing they'd built a whole narrative around me, without my knowledge, for their own benefit, cut through all that. There was no more hoping. No more waiting. I had to make a choice. Play along and keep the peace, or finally step away and take control of the story. That was when I started making calls. But before we get there, I need to explain something. See, the part they never knew, the part they never cared to ask about, was what happened after I hit my lowest point. They knew I'd been delivering pizzas a few years back, sure. That part was true. What they didn't know was why. 2 years after graduating college, I lost everything. I'd taken a job at a promising fintech startup straight out of school. It wasn't glamorous, but I believed in the product and the people. I threw myself into it. Long nights, no weekends, pouring my soul into something I thought mattered. But then the funding dried up. The CEO bailed. Investors pulled out. And just like that, I was out of a job. I tried freelancing. Tried consulting. Took on debt to stay afloat. My savings dried up faster than I expected, and my pride kept me from calling home or asking for help. I didn't want their pity, especially not Rick's. So, I swallowed it and picked up whatever work I could find. Pizza delivery was steady. It paid just enough, and it gave me time to think. People always assume those jobs are the bottom of the barrel, but I met some of the most grounded, hardworking people during those shifts. The old guy on the late-night runs who'd bring extra sauce, just in case. The college dropout who could rebuild a motorcycle engine from scratch. The single mom who juggled 2 jobs and still laughed louder than anyone else on staff. They taught me more about hustle and dignity than any boardroom ever could. It was during those late-night shifts that I started sketching ideas, concepts, business models. I'd get home around 2 a.m., crash for a few hours, then wake up and work on prototypes. I didn't have much, but I had time, and I had drive. Eventually, one of those ideas stuck. I built a beta, reached out to an old professor for advice. He put me in touch with a former student turned investor. One pitch led to another, and soon, I had enough seed money to hire a tiny team. We worked out of a friend's basement for 6 months. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real, and it grew. We solved a niche problem in digital authentication, and word spread faster than we expected. A big client signed on, then another. Then a VC firm came knocking. The rest happened in a blur. We scaled, got noticed, raised a round that turned heads. That Forbes article was just a footnote, but it was the first time anyone outside our world saw what we'd built. And the whole time, every milestone, every breakthrough, I kept my mouth shut when it came to family. Not because I was trying to hide anything, but because I knew they weren't listening. Which brings us back to the wedding. By the time the RSVP deadline rolled around, I had a plan. Not out of revenge, at least not just revenge, but because I was tired of pretending I didn't care. I sent in my response, attending. No +1. No comments. Just that one word. They wanted to use me as a prop? Fine. I'd play along. But not the way they expected. That month leading up to the wedding was oddly quiet. I didn't get any more calls. No more texts. It was like they were holding their breath, waiting for the spotlight to turn on. I imagined them rehearsing speeches, crafting stories about how close we were, how they always believed in me, how family supports family. It made me sick. So, I went back to the people who did believe in me. I called my old mentor. I called my co-founders. I even called 3 of my earliest delivery co-workers. Yeah, the ones from the pizza place, and told them what was going on. And you know what? They had my back. We brainstormed. We laughed. We even made jokes about bringing a pizza to the reception just to prove a point. But underneath the humor, there was a quiet sense of solidarity. These were people who'd seen me fail, who'd watched me rebuild from the ground up, who didn't need headlines or LinkedIn posts to validate me. They knew the truth. And for the first time in a long time, I felt grounded. I'd spent years chasing success, thinking it would fix the hole left by my dad's absence, the constant family jabs, the quiet disappointment in my mom's eyes. But success didn't fix it. People did. Real ones. The night before the wedding, I flew in. Got a room at a modest hotel across town, not the luxury resort they'd booked for their preferred guests. I didn't want the welcome basket. Didn't want the pre-wedding brunch. I wanted to walk into that event as me, not as their pawn. I wore a plain black suit. No tie. No designer labels. Just clean lines and quiet confidence. And yeah, I did bring something else. Tucked in my pocket was a small envelope. Thick. Heavy. Sealed tight. But we'll get to that later. The ceremony was fine. Boring, even. Andrew stood there grinning like he'd won the lottery. Tessa looked perfect, polished, robotic. The vows were copy-paste sincerity. No one tripped. No one cried. The photos were overly posed. It was exactly what I expected. The reception was held at a vineyard just outside the city. Expensive. Over-decorated. All white roses and string quartets. The kind of place where you couldn't laugh too loudly without someone glaring at you. I kept to myself for the first hour. Watched. Observed. Uncle Rick worked the room like a campaign manager, grinning and shaking hands, telling everyone how tight-knit our family was. Aunt Liz clinked glasses with strangers and leaned into every photo like it was her moment. And Andrew, he looked smug, like he had finally become the man he always wanted to be. Until he saw me. He froze. Just for a second, then pasted on a smile and made his way over. "Dylan," he said, arms wide like we were old friends. I gave him a tight nod. "Andrew, glad you could make it," he said. "Really glad." "Wouldn't miss it," I replied. He looked around nervously. "Hey, listen, just to clear the air, I didn't mean for things to get weird after the engagement party. I think there was some miscommunication. Miscommunication, I echoed. Like telling people I was funding your wedding. His smile faltered. Look, that wasn't me, okay? That was Mom and Dad trying to make the family look good. You know how they are. I nodded slowly. Sure. You're not mad, are you? He asked, voice low now. Because we could really use a moment like this. It's good optics for both of us. Win-win. That was when I realized. He still didn't get it. He didn't see me as a person. Just a story to tell. A success to latch onto. I took a step closer. Don't worry, Andrew, I said. I've got something special planned. His eyes lit up, thinking I was finally giving in. Really? Really? And with that, I walked away. Back to my seat. Back to the envelope in my pocket. Because the best part of rebuilding your life from rock bottom? You get to choose who gets a seat at the table. And who gets cut off. I don't think I've ever seen Andrew more smug than during his wedding reception. He moved through the crowd like he was the Prince of Monaco, shaking hands, sharing inside jokes with people he barely knew, acting like his last name actually meant something outside the walls of that vineyard. It was the kind of event where people didn't show up to celebrate love, they showed up to be seen. And Andrew loved that kind of theater. But that night, I wasn't just a guest. I was the wild card they hadn't accounted for. The envelope in my inside jacket pocket felt heavier by the minute, not because of its weight, though it wasn't light, but because of what it represented. Inside were carefully printed documents, wrapped in a crisp band, tucked into a thick paper sleeve bearing a simple logo. No frills, no drama, but they would cause both. And the best part? I hadn't come alone. That's something no one in my family ever thought to ask. Who do I trust? For them, trust was transactional. You trusted people who could offer you something. You aligned with those who elevated your image. But for me, trust wasn't about gain. It was about truth. It was about loyalty built in dark, quiet places. Over coffee at 3 a.m. after a failed pitch. On rainy pizza shifts when you loaned someone gas money without asking. In that dingy basement startup office when we almost gave up, but didn't. Those are the people I called. Some of them were at the wedding. Not in tuxedos. Not on the guest list. But they were there. See, when you come from the ground up, you learn how to work behind the scenes. You learn how to move without being noticed until it's too late. And most importantly, you learn how to identify leverage, where it hides, how to wield it, and when to strike. The weeks leading up to the wedding weren't just for stewing in anger or crafting clever one-liners. I used that time to do what I do best, research. I didn't go digging for dirt because I needed revenge. I went digging because I needed to understand who I was dealing with. I needed to know how deep the rot went. Turns out, Andrew had secrets. Of course he did. The wedding was costing upwards of $75,000, despite what Uncle Rick claimed about keeping it classy but affordable. The venue itself charged more than most people's annual rent. The dress code was black tie optional, but the expectation was very much black tie mandatory. There were signature cocktails named after the couple, a live jazz band, a photo booth with a branded neon sign, imported flowers. All of that should have been a red flag on its own, especially considering Andrew's modest salary at the insurance firm. But no one in the family questioned it. They just assumed the money came from me. That was their mistake. They counted on my silence. But I talk when it matters. I found out from a mutual acquaintance, someone who used to work with Andrew at the firm, that he'd been floating investment opportunities to co-workers for the past year, telling them he had an inside track with a startup, my startup, by the way, and that if they got in now, they'd see returns within 6 months. Minimum. It wasn't even subtle. He used my name. He showed people my press clippings, screenshotted my LinkedIn, quoted stats from articles I'd been in, told them he had a direct line to me, that I trusted him, that we were practically co-founders. The kicker? He'd already pulled in almost $60,000. It wasn't enough to cover the whole wedding, but it gave him the padding to book the vendors and pretend he was paying out of pocket. The rest? That came from quiet promises made to Uncle Rick's friends, businessmen who thought they were buying into the next tech unicorn. Men who assumed that if Rick's nephew was the brains, the whole thing must be legit. The lie was so clean, so plausible, that no one blinked twice. Except me. So I gathered receipts, pulled statements, contacted my legal team, and had them review the claims. We didn't want to push anything through the courts yet, but we wanted to be ready. I even called one of the investors. Let's call him Mark. Mark was a mid-tier real estate developer with a surprisingly kind demeanor. I expected arrogance, but what I got was a man who sounded genuinely duped. He told me you were taking friends and family investors first, Mark said. Said the round was already half full, and I needed to act fast. How much did you give him? 25 grand. I cashed out some stock. I felt a pit form in my stomach. You do realize I never authorized any of that? I said carefully. There was a long pause. I do now. He wasn't angry, just disappointed. And those are the people I can't stand to see hurt. The ones who believe too easily, who trust too deeply, the ones who just want to be a part of something. That's when I knew I couldn't just let this slide. Andrew hadn't just lied to his family. He'd lied to people like me. People who believed in something bigger than themselves. He turned their hope into his leverage, their dreams into his cocktail budget. So I called in favors. I had Mark attend the wedding, not as a guest, but as a +1 to one of my co-founders, who had RSVP'd last minute using a fake name. He wore a simple suit, nothing flashy, and he brought a file folder. Inside were copies of everything. Statements, emails, screenshots, proof. We weren't going to start a war that night, but we were going to plant a landmine. And that envelope in my jacket pocket? It wasn't for Andrew. It was for Uncle Rick. Because while Andrew was the one spinning lies, Rick was the one spreading them. He was the one calling around after the engagement party, dropping hints that Dylan's going to set the family up for life. The one telling Aunt Liz that I was working on a family trust. The one who told his friend group that I'd agreed to consult on their businesses as a favor to family. He weaponized my silence just like Andrew did. So I waited. The reception rolled on. Speeches were made. Toasts were given. Tessa's father talked for 20 minutes about love and commitment. Rick gave a boisterous speech about family legacy and ambition, casually mentioning, twice, how proud he was of his nephew, the entrepreneur. I clapped like everyone else. Then Andrew took the mic. He gave a short, rehearsed speech about meeting Tessa, falling in love, how she changed his life. There was laughter, a few ahs, and a pause just long enough for tension to build. And then he said it. And I want to give a special thanks, he said, turning toward me, to my cousin Dylan. Most of you know him as the mind behind Signalbox, and let's just say, his support has been incredible. We wouldn't be here without him. The room clapped. I didn't. I stood up, calmly, quietly, walked across the room and approached the head table. Uncle Rick smiled like a man about to receive a check. I stopped beside him and pulled out the envelope, slid it across the table. For you? I said. He blinked. What's this? I leaned in. Proof. Then I turned and walked away. No drama. No mic drop. No shouting. But I could feel the eyes following me. Rick opened the envelope. I didn't have to see it. I knew the moment he read the first page. His face drained of color. He flipped through the stack. Faster. Desperate. Andrew leaned over, trying to read. Rick slapped his hand away. Tessa looked confused. Aunt Liz looked concerned. Mark was watching from across the room, arms folded. And me? I walked outside, breathed in the cool night air. Because sometimes, revenge isn't loud. It's the moment they realize the game is over and you're already gone. The sound of string lights buzzing overhead and clinking champagne glasses behind me faded as I stepped out into the vineyard's night air. The silence out there was peaceful, too peaceful for what was brewing back inside. I stayed outside for a few minutes, just enough time for the envelope to make its impact. I didn't need to witness the first detonation. That wasn't the point. I'd already seen how Uncle Rick reacted when something didn't fit his narrative. This time, there would be no charming his way out. No backhanded jokes. No manipulation. Because this time, I'd left nothing to interpretation. The packet I handed him wasn't just vague proof. It was a full portfolio. Every fraudulent claim Andrew had made. Every false promise signed under my name. Every lie passed along by Rick to secure business clout in his own social circle. There was even a polite letter from my attorney, typed in clear, professional language. This is not a formal cease and desist, nor is it yet a notice of legal action. However, if the financial misrepresentation and defamation of Mr. Dylan Hale continues beyond the date of delivery, or if Mr. Hale is found to have suffered additional reputational damage as a result of Mr. Andrew Cartwright's false claims, you will receive further legal correspondence from our firm. It was elegant, undeniable, irrefutable. By the time I walked back inside, I didn't need to say a word. I could see it in their faces. Andrew was pale and sweating, his arm gripped tightly around the back of Tessa's chair, who was now visibly leaning away from him. Her parents stood off to the side, whispering, expressions flickering between confusion and dawning horror. Uncle Rick sat frozen, flipping through the last few pages again and again as if hoping something had changed. Nothing had. Mark, the investor who had been tricked by Andrew, made his way to the table with my co-founder beside him. They introduced themselves calmly, politely. Mark even smiled when he spoke. "Hello again, Andrew," he said. "Funny seeing you here." Andrew stood too quickly and knocked over his glass. "Mark, I can explain." "No need," Mark said, holding up a hand. "I'm not here to argue. Just wanted to let you know I've begun the process of filing a fraud complaint with the SEC, and my lawyers are drawing up civil charges. You'll be hearing from them soon. I expect full restitution of the $25,000 I gave you under false pretenses, plus damages." Andrew looked to his father like a child searching for permission to cry. But Rick was no longer even pretending to help. He sat slack-jawed, his empire of smoke and mirrors crumbling before his eyes. That's the thing about people like him. They're fine as long as they control the narrative. But take away their script, they're lost. "Rick," Mark continued, turning to him, "you vouched for your son. You said Dylan was backing the investment personally. You told my wife over dinner you were helping structure the payout schedule." Rick opened his mouth, but no sound came out. "Don't worry," Mark added. "You'll get a copy of the filing too. Just a formality." The room was silent. No music. No chatter. Even the wait staff paused at the edge of the room like they knew they were watching something delicate and explosive at the same time. And then I walked up to Andrew. He was sweating now, his expensive suit doing nothing to hide how small he looked. He opened his mouth, probably to plead, or lie, or spin, but I cut him off with a single raised hand. "I didn't come here to ruin your wedding," I said, calm and steady. "I came here to stop you from ruining other people's lives." You could have just called me," he stammered. "I did," I replied. "You ignored me. Then you lied about me. Then you tried to profit off me." His eyes darted toward the guests, who were now visibly uncomfortable, pretending not to listen but failing. "And for what?" I asked. "A wedding? A photo op? You leveraged my name and my silence to sell a lie. To investors. To Tessa. To your own family." Tessa looked at him then. Not the way someone looks at a man they love. The way someone looks at a broken painting in a gallery, wondering how they ever saw beauty in it. "I didn't mean," he started. "You meant every word," I said. "You just didn't think I'd speak up." He tried to take a step toward me, but Tessa rose from her seat and stepped between us. She didn't even look at him. She turned to me. "Dylan," she said quietly, "I had no idea. I swear." "I know," I said. "I saw it on your face the second you looked me up." She nodded, holding her arms. "We'll talk," she said, more to herself than to him, before walking away, not toward her parents, not toward the crowd, but toward the exit. Andrew took a shaky step after her, but stopped. No one moved to stop him, but no one moved to help, either. The DJ, unsure what to do, softly restarted the music, but the illusion was shattered. The toasts were done. The vibe was poisoned. One by one, people began leaving. Some made polite excuses. Others left without a word. A few gave me quiet nods of understanding as they passed, though no one dared speak to me out loud. Not now. Within 30 minutes, the wedding reception was down to a few awkward relatives and Rick, now sitting at the corner table, alone, defeated, staring into his untouched glass of whiskey. I walked by him once more, pausing just long enough for him to register me. "You brought this on yourself," I said. "I kept my distance for years. You just wouldn't leave well enough alone. You humiliated us," he said bitterly, voice low. "No," I replied. "You humiliated yourselves. I just stopped covering for you." I didn't wait for a response. There wasn't going to be one. The next week, things moved quickly. Andrew was placed on leave at his insurance firm the day after the wedding. By Friday, he was fired. Turns out, someone had leaked the wedding incident to the company's legal team. Between the active fraud investigation and the potential lawsuit from Mark, they couldn't afford to keep him. His employee bio vanished from the website overnight. Tessa moved out of their shared apartment by the end of the month. I didn't talk to her again after the wedding, but I got a thank you card in the mail a few weeks later. Inside was a simple message. "Thank you for showing me the truth. I almost built my future on a lie." I didn't reply. There wasn't anything else to say. As for Uncle Rick, his reputation took the biggest hit of all. Turns out, the investors he'd been bragging to were less than thrilled when they found out his entrepreneur nephew wasn't backing anything. At least 2 of them pulled out of joint ventures with him within the month. Rumors started to swirl. His name became mud in their business circles. One of his longest-running partnerships quietly dissolved. His auto shop franchise, still standing, but not untouched. People talk. Customers listen. The last I heard, he'd downsized significantly. My mom asked me if I regretted any of it. Not in a judgmental way, just a mother's voice, weary and concerned. I told her the truth. I regret letting it go on for so long. She didn't press after that. I think, in her heart, she knew it had been a long time coming. Life moved on. My company continued to grow. We landed a government contract 6 months later that nearly tripled our valuation. I hired more people, expanded offices, took care of the team who'd been there since day one, the ones who stood with me when I had nothing but ideas and a mountain of unpaid bills. And I never delivered another pizza again. But sometimes, late at night, I still think about those years. The long shifts, the stares from people who thought they had me figured out, the silence from the people who were supposed to lift me up, and how I survived all of it. Not by shouting, not by proving myself over and over again, but by staying quiet. Until I didn't. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do isn't scream. It's smile while they underestimate you, and then watch their whole house of cards come crashing down.